Welcome to Psychedelia Integration.
Hello, Paul. Good to
Hello,
see you again.
you too. And Psychedelia is a Los Angeles-based psychedelic organization since 2016, founded by Sri Malcolm Godase, providing education and support using a harm reduction approach for those using psychedelics. Please use psychedelics wisely, everyone. So we're excited to have, as you saw, Bett Williams, the author of The Wild Kindness, a Psilocybin Odyssey. It's a most magical book. Yes, there it is. And this book reminds us of the magic in magic mushrooms. It's also, this book's the perfect counter to Michael Pollan's rather clinical exploration in how to change your mind. And it brings a delightfully poetic narrative to the table, reminding us of our magical place in the space we call our world. So, hello, Bett.
Hi, Paul.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
And yeah, I remember when I first met you, it was like, what's it, April or something of 2019, year and a half or almost 2 years now.
Yeah, we had an event with Michelle Loke and woman from Drug Policy Alliance down in Boyle. Was that Boyle Heights?
Boyle Heights, yes.
Yeah, there's a bunch of series of events and a lot of people kind of connected in with each other with those events. I miss events.
I know, me too. That was a great space too. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, no one's been anywhere for a while during this pandemic here. But let me read your bio and we'll jump right in. So Bett is a literary writer and psychedelic explorer and the author of The Wild Kindness, a Psilocybin Odyssey from Daughter Press. And it's a memoir about growing mushrooms in the high desert of New Mexico. Her other works include The Wrestling Party and Girl Walking Backwards, which was named one of the 10 best young adult queer novels by Vogue magazine. She's written for several publications, including Double Blind, Out Magazine, Flaunt, Lucid News, and The Lenny Letter. She was featured speaker at Horizons Perspectives on Psychedelics conference in 2018. And she and her partner, Beth Hill, host the podcast No Cures, Only Alchemy, about the intersection between psychedelics and culture. So, welcome again.
So fun to be on this podcast. It's a wonderful organization and can't wait to come hang out someday in a field talking about psychedelics.
Right, I know. I look forward to that too. It's just time to get away. So let's, what inspired you to, write this book?
Well, I had written 2 books before, and writing is what I'm talented at writing and not so much in sculpture or, oil painting. So I had a real hard time finishing another book. It was like 16, 17 years between Wild Kindness and The Wrestling Party, and to the point I'd nearly given up. And I was not doing so great in a lot of other areas of my life either, relationship issues, substance issues. And a friend visited me off the internet who I'd never met before, but we connected. And in a sense, this poet brought me the mushrooms. She was like, let's do some mushrooms. And so I found someone, I was like, I know where to get them. There's a guy at AA I can go get some mushrooms from. Anyway, kind of started a path where I did them to heal myself by a fire, maybe every 3 weeks to a month. And it was the only little bit of light in my whole life. And so I had already decided I wasn't able to write anymore. But the mushrooms, I was like, well, maybe I can write a book about mushrooms. Doesn't seem to be any books written by people outside of a certain academic model, like the books like Ken Kesey and Tom Robbins and such that were big inspirations, and they definitely represented a certain like white dude machismo. And I'm kind of a white dude machismo too, but I was like, well, Paul, they'll listen to me because I'm a woman, right? But what ended up being like an attempt just to pull myself out of a hole ended up being like a 6-year long literary odyssey because I remembered what writing was. And I was influenced by writers like Bret Easton Ellis, Douglas Copeland, Dennis Cooper, a kind of 90s drug book aesthetic, which really, these books in the 90s about Go Ask Alice, that was earlier, but the drug novel ends up being a story about a certain type of person and their intersection with culture, because they usually like collapse and then reach out into the culture that exists of like rock and roll or whatever. But what does that mean now in this day and age when I, am trying not to die of alcoholism or drug use? What is the psychedelic version of a zeitgeist drug book? So I was thinking the other day that a person might do a book about mushrooms and stay very in their circle and just write about the experience. I use the mushrooms to help me read the world, like what's going on. And I really touched upon, I think in the book, a lot of what millennials are going through with like options fading away, and like, how do you become something unless you create it for yourself? So I think I was like, I think that's what the book might be about. It's like how to create a world you can live in. And mushrooms were my only hope at the time. They gave me a new lease on life, really, and a literary world for myself. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. And yeah, it sounds, I really hear what you're saying about that, using the mushrooms to take a look at the world. And it's kind of like through going in our inner worlds, we can help make sense of the outer world and
Yeah.
bring that sort of magic to our experience as well. And that's interesting timing too. I just, noticed that what you're saying, every 3 to 4 weeks you were doing the mushrooms. How was that? Because I found that particular timing, I think, is a really good timing for using psychedelics for growth. Every 3 to 4 weeks, it gives you time to process in between and kind of savor the experience and look forward to it.
Yeah, I want to ask you too, if you've had this experience of the romance phase of doing psychedelics. Like when I first started using them for healing, it was all I had to do was just listen to them, and everything was so extra healing and miraculous and vivid. And then I think stuff comes, like there's other phases. Like somebody wrote about it saying like there's a movement towards like, the romance phase, and then there's the like messiah phase. Like that happens very shortly after. You're just like, mushrooms saved my life. And that's a mistake you can make, where you start to like maybe have healing sessions in your house and getting arrested like that lady in South Africa. And then there's the jaded psychonaut. Like there's different phases, and for people starting out, just treasure it. It can, if it's for you, if the mushrooms pick you, it usually is so like especially wonderful in the beginning. Did that happen for you with your explorations? You have an interesting story, as I recall.
Yeah, mine's a little different in that my sort of romance phase happened maybe before I started, because it was the promise of the healing. I was like, oh, I love this whole idea. But my actual experiences, though, were very trying. A lot of physical uncomfortableness, that I had to also figure out that at first my dose was way too high. I was getting too overwhelmed. And so I had to lower that and then stay with it. And then I started getting really more comfortable and then I was starting to have some better experiences. And then I was noticing changes in my life too. So and it was that same thing about every 4 weeks or so, doing, a new experience.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, there was, about the woman in South Africa. Maybe
Monica Kromhout.
Yes, Monica. She was pretty interesting. That whole, the thing about, like you were, saying about someone just taking the mushrooms and then deciding they're ready to lead ceremonies. And there's a fair number of people that seem to be in that category.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes they really think the mushrooms are telling them to do that. And I have done one kind of nutty thing where I thought the mushrooms wanted me to bring like a gift of sage to some people who I was living with my girlfriend at the time and renting my house. So I went to the tenants and brought like a bird wing and insisted on smudging their whole family.
Oh,
They were fine with it, but in hindsight, I mean, thank goodness that was the craziest thing I ever did.
right, right. Yeah, it's good.
But but Monica Kromhout, who'd only she never drank in her life, never done drugs. The ayahuasca told her, she did one ayahuasca trip and told her to do mushrooms. And then the mushrooms on her first trip said, have ceremonies in your house every Saturday night, open them up to anyone who will come. And then basically the South African SWAT team like came because somebody escaped the ceremony and walked to the police off, well, like precinct, and then they came back to the house and she bought up the whole supply in South Africa, like almost, he had a whole refrigerator. So she was, I think she's still dealing with charges of like massive trafficking.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that was another, interesting piece, that so many people do get specific messages. And you were saying, that if you listen to all the messages that you got, you'd be in jail.
All kinds of crazy things. Yeah, and I've been thinking, like, what people ask a lot, what is the voice that feels true versus one that you might want to think twice about? And I realize it's just like regular life. Like, when do you trust someone? How do you feel in your body? Like, this is like a level 10 truth, or this is like a level 6 joking with me. Because I feel like the mushrooms collaborate with your own belief systems. And then sometimes the mushrooms speak as an entity all their own without that collaboration. But that's more like the scene where I'm looking at a mountain and it's turning into hieroglyphic language, very specific. Like, that's mushroom language where I don't even know what the hell that is, other than to just take on its resonance and be in awe. And then there's times where it almost takes over my brain and speaks in my own brain's language, as if I'm remembering a story. Like, it'll say blah, blah, blah. And that's the collaboration, which I do have to, not necessarily take as truth until the next morning when I go, okay, I get what was happening.
Right. And I think that's a really important point. And that's a great word that I haven't heard used, I don't think, really, collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's better than saying it's filtered through our own psyche, which it is kind of anyway, right? But I love that collaboration sensibility.
I guess that's what the book is, right, Paul? It's like, because the book is not, I'm not trying to create a facsimile of the beauty of this incredible sacrament, like maybe an artist can do that, but it's that collaboration. It's actually me like begging the mushrooms for help, and then the wonderful thing about a mushroom trip for a writer is it creates somewhat of a structure, because you have your mushroom trip to look back on, and mushroom trips they're kind of Hollywood style in a way, right? They definitely have arcs and ebbs and flows, moments of anxiety. So I was saying the other day about how we live in a state with our social media where things are really flat a lot of the time. It's hard to tell when something's really delicious and when something is just something you might think is superficial. Like, everything kind of vibrates with the same frequency, and like mushrooms create specificity and nuance, and they say, look at this, oh, that's boring, or like, don't look at that, that'll freak you out. So that kind of pointer of the mushrooms is a great tool for, I think, any artist.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I like how you really interweave. You bring a real sensibility, and the whole book does that really well.
Like, in the enlightenment that mushrooms, I think all enlightenment, for me, from where I'm sitting, any experience where you suddenly see the oneness of the universe, it's humbling how temporary that is. Like, as I speak as somebody who's done mushrooms fairly regularly for 10 years, like, some days I just feel like so lost and so humbled and so intensely human. Like, there's a line in the big book that says, I'm sicker than most, and that's interesting in the realm of like wellness communities where I'm speaking about mushrooms. It's like nothing feels permanent. Like enlightenment isn't like this permanent state.
You have to bring that experience back into the world, and it's temporary. It's a glimpse, you know.
I saw that picture where you have all the bookmarks. I love it.
Yeah, I still have. Here you go.
Nice, gorgeous.
I know there's so many. There's so much great stuff in here.
I have some wise moments in there. I'm like, okay, remember I said that because you could use that today.
Exactly. Yeah, we have a line in here, you know, talking about how the meanwhile, there are thousands of mushrooms sitting in the back of freezers in the US wanting to go to the goddamn beach.
Michael Pollan, like, I think it was on Joe Rogan, he like poo-pooed people who take them, and he's like, well, you know, you could always just take them and go to the beach, or you could do them in a dark room with a therapist like you're supposed to. And I was like, oh, these mushrooms are like, take me to the beach.
Right. Yeah.
I've done LSD on the beach.
Right. Yeah. As a teenager, I used to do a lot of psychedelics, and LSD. I remember body surfing.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
On LSD. It's like, whoa. It's funny, when you're really involved in some physical activity, it's almost like it doesn't take away from the LSD, but it kind of gets incorporated into the experience. So you almost forget that you're on it.
Yeah, like that's the whole, what do they call it? The adrenaline sports community. There's a word, extreme sports is a huge psychedelic scene. Like they are doing like dangerous shit on acid.
Yeah.
And they can't really talk about it because it's like, they don't want to be held responsible for the dumb people who might do the wrong thing. But
that's
wise.
Maybe you need to be already pretty expert at what you're doing to add that component.
I've done some good swimming on LSD, but that's about as far as I'll take it.
You know, we talked a little bit about ceremony and how you bring ceremony to the party, shall we say. And, you know, I had this sense that, you know, thinking of bringing respect and ceremony, it's maybe a deeper way of saying set and setting.
Yeah, and to define what ceremony is needs to be approached so gently because, you know, we're so colonized and we can like look things up in a book and set up things what other people say is the right thing to do. But ceremony for me with the mushrooms literally came from the mushroom experience. The mushrooms slowly they got really bossy and just kind of said, we need smoke, we need offerings, we need you to burn copal. And then, you know, I would just start to feel the presence, I call them, of grandmothers around and other elementals and things. But what's interesting is I'm always amazed that it doesn't come like automatically for people to fall into ceremony. Like it's something that they're trying to get towards. And it's come to me that like I do come from an experience of being invited into indigenous ceremonial circles for ever since I was like 18, just because of the people I've met and been partnered with. And I realized bringing that to the mushrooms probably had everything to do with the fact that immediately I knew to offer tobacco, to have a sense of paying attention to other plants when I was doing it, that space was familiar. So when I went to Huautla de Jimenez and did a ceremony with an elder cuandera, it was the same thing. Like it was like, oh, this is exactly like Lakota and Nipi ceremony. It's like the same give and take, call and response to the energies that you're calling in. And I do believe that probably goes back to old ways. You know, Europeans have the same ways, but it definitely isn't the church way. It's a in your body direct relationship with very real spirits that come, whether they be the spirits of the plants, your ancestors, all kinds of stuff. I mean, I'm not in any kind of shaman training, so I can only imagine the things like when you go down to Huautla de Jimenez, I hear that it's like a 10-year training, like if you want to serve the mushrooms, it takes so many years. So all the things you're learning about blockages in the body and the energies you call in to fix that, and how language is used and how songs are used, is it's a technology, and the mushrooms will impart it. And I'm slowly learning a few good, tips on things, but to really pull that off, it's amazing, and a long, hard road.
Yeah, it's very powerful doing that. I like how you talk about that and bringing the ancestors in, particularly. I mean, and there's a lot of parallels that I see to what they're discovering in modern psychology and neuroscience with epigenetics, and how those things could kind of tie in to all of
Mm-hmm.
this. And to me, my sense is like yours, I think, is when you bring that sense of ceremony and respect, you are then opening yourself up to those energies in a more
Mm-hmm.
positive way.
Yeah, I actually did a Day of the Dead ceremony successfully for the first time with mushrooms a few weeks ago. And I'd never done that kind of ceremony. Like when I call in the spirits, I usually just call everybody in. I've heard this to be very common with mushroom practitioners, the sense of like inviting in everyone. But I always say, except for the bad guys, I always have like a little mini jail. I'm like, only the ones that keep their altars right, but I invite everyone in. And I don't have a direct experience with my own ancestors. This time I did, because I was with somebody with the specific intention of, blood ancestry. And man, they told me that the women, when we came over, I'm, a settler from like German and English ancestry, that came from like not wealthy people. And they told me that the women had to leave so much behind that they were like heartbroken that they didn't have their tea sets with them and their objects, because that was all they had of their medicine. Like we all come from medicine ways, and the women keep it in their kitchenware. And I
Right.
had this whole ceremony of like giving my ancestors back their shit, their stuff that like they couldn't bring on the boat, and they were so sad and broken. They wanted to trade with the people in America, and they didn't have anything.
That's
And it
very,
all fell apart. They're like, if I only could have traded those people my tea set, we could have not been assholes.
yeah, yeah. Those are important, those little things.
Yeah.
I know when I was younger, I did not appreciate the importance of those little things. And it's very,
Mhm.
powerful just to have
And
those
it's so
elements.
surprising. It's surprising what the mushrooms bring up, like things you'd never think of. Yeah.
Yeah, the beauty of them.
Maybe I'll say kind of a quick overview of the book and how it goes briefly, which is like,
Yeah.
I start doing the mushrooms, the supply runs out. And so my only option is to grow them myself. I do that, and my life kind of takes a turn with a breakup. I end up seeking comfort through inviting people over. It kind of all turns into a party, which ends up going very badly. And then I seek community because I really need help. And I find Kai Wingo, who was part of a high dose psilocybin community in Cleveland and Detroit. Then I go to Outlet at Jimenez. And then slowly throughout the book, I start developing my own practice. Like it's kind of unfolds and things get a little bit better, and in a relationship. But there's one part where my dog is CIA, turns kind of magic realism. And I talk a little bit about how psychedelics have been used as like cult bait, and a little bit of government intrigue thrown in. How easy it is to like be tempted to be a grandiose person and use them as a cult leader, and how I'm not built for that.
Along those lines, and a little bit about what we were talking about before, there's a great little section in the book, which I highlighted among many.
What medicine do you keep in your dream time? The mushrooms asked. I let my dreams be dreams, I guess. That's dumb, they said. You take in all the world, all that internet garbage. You're way too open to other people, and you think you can get by without keeping medicine in your dream time? What do you love? Tell me anything. Just say it. I don't know. I love hawks. I love rivers and streams. Then keep those things in your dreams. You need an anchor to remind you that your dream time belongs only to you. You don't even get that it's yours, poor thing, blown like a plastic shopping bag in the wind. I was encroaching upon new territory. To continue to be a passive observer in the psychedelic space was to risk drowning in psychic mud. The mushrooms were coming with a question. What is it that you want? They were becoming that nightmare dream date who asked you which restaurant you want to go to, and you say, no, you pick the restaurant. And they say, no, you pick it. I insist. And then you have a total meltdown. What was I allowed to call my own? Just because a thing exists doesn't mean it's mine to take.
Yeah, that's a very powerful, passage. I feel, and you can apply that to regular, life. It's very Jungian in a sense too, isn't it? It's just rich with bringing that sense of magic to the experience and to our lives, to keep us really open to having that open.
Yeah, it's kind of a lead up to what I call the buffalo problem in the book, where the crisis of not knowing what I was allowed to take or do in psychedelic space got so critical that I got cold feet and took like a 6-month break, because I wasn't sure if I should just be passive in the face of this holy sacrament, or just come as you are, and so I read a lot of like Peter Kingsley, some pre-Socratic Greek philosophy, some James Baldwin. I just went on like a tear, and I can't say it was any particular truth that pulled me out of my my hesitation, but something clicked, and it was a thing of like, go in. It's a conversation. You get to decide what this means to you as you go along. There really are no rules. We're so used to spiritual spaces being so colonized. I mean, Peter Kingsley talks about how even Buddhism and forms of religion that we think are groovy have horrible, tyrannical, colonizing histories behind them. And so to be in a space that is utterly open, it's so terrifying. And we come with so much ancient baggage. It's so mysterious. I mean, how do you do it?
It brings a real sense of awe into the mix of trying to reach and feeling into those states without all the trappings and all of the history and the baggage, as you're saying.
And now I've heard Eric Davis speak, and it makes me realize that I was onto something, because he says the only way to deal with the completely incomprehensible is with humor and ordinary reason. And I was like, oh, wow, I guess I knew something throughout, because it really, the voice of the book is very vernacular, funny, foolish, and self-depreciating and wise at the same time. And that is the voice that gets you through. And it makes me think about Tom Robbins and the introduction of like talking socks and in narratives and things like that. Like there's something we started to see in the 60s and 70s that led up to Sesame Street, which was a very psychedelic show. A lot of people have psychedelic histories who made it, like a kind of psychedelic humor. And Terrence had it. Like McKenna, was that. I mean, he's Big Bird. Have you seen Terrence McKenna, Big Bird?
No, I don't think so. That sounds great.
It's a mashup where Big Bird's walking around and pontificating in one of Terrence's lectures.
I may have seen a clip of that now that you mention it. It's pretty good.
But that's like that kind of thinking is, I mean, that's how you end up in the gutter as a psychedelic person. Like that humorous voice is kind of always with me, but
it's valuable. It's bringing the practical and the sensible, because we get too high, or so to speak, in the clouds, or out there in fantasy land almost, without bringing it back down to the reality. And that's it's like throwing down the tobacco, right? Isn't it? It's like grounding. It's the part that's missing quite often.
That's what I don't get about a completely psychological practice with psychedelics, because I feel that like they dissolve you to such an extent. And one of the experiences is that you are, everything is important around you, and you're just one voice among a billions. So that dissolving, the idea that the mushrooms might need you to trip because of their own agenda, not yours, is something I like to entertain. Like in indigenous ceremonies, like all the ones all over the world, whether it's Sundance or, you know, Maypole, you're doing something actually for nature, like because nature needs, for some reason, us to go out and dance around and make feasts, and who knows what that's helping. It's probably helping the entire ecosystem, the birds and all of it. And doing mushrooms has shown me that like the things that I think are important about a trip may not be what the mushrooms have in mind. It's why they exist and work on my being.
Yes, I love that whole idea. And it really gives me pause. And I would think it would give everyone pause to think about, well, the mushrooms have their own agenda separately. And we're
and you don't have to go along with them. They might be freaks and like ultimately have something bad in mind. I have no idea. Like they once told me, yeah, that I could stop drinking if I wanted, but they kind of like rotting dead things, and they find drunk people very entertaining.
they're pretty funny characters.
Like one should always be suspicious of anything one is engaging with on a deep level.
Right, right, exactly. But it also brings, it's like a deep wisdom to take someone to that point of view that, oh, this is way bigger than me. The mushrooms have their own agenda. I'm a tool of the mushrooms.
That's why I think, you know, when it comes down to what is ceremony, you know, you can look to the traditional Mazatec ceremonies and traditional ayahuasca. There's like, it's arguable what is a traditional ayahuasca ceremony, but there's a lot of singing, and there's a lot of focus on something that takes you out of yourself. Very compared, because it's so easy to just fall back on mushrooms, and it's never very pleasant. But as a Westerner, the thought is like, oh, I should go into that deep internal state. Whereas in the old ways, you know, you sit up and you pray and you kind of have a balance between your interior and exterior world. Like it's looked down upon, let's say, in a peyote ceremony to like lie down and go on your own trip. You have to sing, you have to sit up, pay attention. So that's definitely a difference between an old way ceremonial and the psychological.
Yeah, it's very much more community oriented and connection oriented.
Yeah.
Which is it's a very different experience. And in my experiences, I think the community aspect, because I did ceremonies primarily, as opposed to solo journeys, and the healing that was there was, I think, as much a part of being part of that community where there was singing.
Yeah.
As much as you were able to, depending on where you were, but it was right there in front of you.
Yeah. Well, an interesting anecdote about doing them with people is that I usually do high ceremony with Syrian rue, which is a MAO inhibitor. And it specifically is the chemical in ayahuasca, in the mixture in the ayahuasca vine, I believe, that makes it so everyone sees the jaguar together, or they have this connection. And then it blew my mind. Scientists discovered MAOI inhibitors in mushrooms, in the psilocybin mushroom itself. So it's already built into the mushroom to have an interconnected trip with who you're with.
That is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So all the more reason not to go in your own trip, because then it's like if some person's next to you and you don't really have a way to connect with them because they're like going down their thing.
It does bring up a lot of questions like, okay, so what is healing? You know, because talking about this difference between the solo or the, you know, individual versus the collective community ceremonial approach. People are getting results, I guess, for their specific issues in the solo journeys as well.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, it is a more stripped down version of what's available.
Yeah, and like for instance, facing terminal illness, I could see the need for someone to hold the space and to directly, individually, you know, in a dark place, like look at your psyche. I just say like that's a different ceremony. I think psilocybin therapy is really necessary, and I think it is going to be our Western tradition, like in the way Kai Wingo and the Detroit Cleveland scene is not like the counterculture because they do it with their families. It's not outside of the world that they live in, similar to down with the Mazatec. I think our Western therapy ways are how we're going to get our dads to do it, how we're going to pass on a lineage of stories to our relatives. And like it just seems like we're headed for that to be the non-counterculture way to do it in America. But we'll have everything going on at the same time.
Yeah, I like that idea of concurrency, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's important to have this other more ceremonial, community-based way, and that's part of the danger, perhaps, with all of this, the corporatization of psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
that the
Yeah.
ceremonial way doesn't get shut out.
Yeah, but then there's also people doing ceremony very badly. There's been some stories I've heard of people getting like actually hurt, burned. There have been issues in the ceremonies in Jamaica. Well, those are more therapeutic, where people were purging and they couldn't stop vomiting. And that's not really a mushroom thing. It seems like, why is that happening? And ceremony is like, that's the thing about holding space in that old way. You have to know that there's things like spiritual attack, there's people coming in with entities, like these things are sort of legit, sort of understood things in a lot of circles. And so I went to a ceremony in Mexico run by Jess Grotfeld. It was incredible, and the skill she had, and it seemed to come so naturally. And this woman, Mihan Carroll, people really who know what they're doing. It's amazing. Mostly because I know how badly it can go. Like
Right.
things can go very badly, and when you're trying to do like a sacrament ceremony that's about the earthways, it's like either you have to just be extremely humble and just do it with your friends, or really kind of walk a long walk that I could see you pulling off maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 good ceremonies, but a lifetime of it, that is a difficult road. I mean, it's hard. Stuff comes up for people, things get dangerous. Yeah.
Right. And it's like you were mentioning with Kai Wingo. That was such a great part of the book, talking about her, and I was really sad to see that she passed.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, they already had a community going, and they
Mm-hmm.
were doing the high dose psychedelics with
And they have
this
a whole different
community.
ceremony, completely different. When you bring it up to those doses, it might as well be a different entity completely. Yeah. And Kai would go visit people, like people would do these high doses. They couldn't get anyone to sit with them, 30 grams, right? And so they would call Kai, and Kai would like come over and talk them down. Yeah.
So interesting. Well, the
Mm-hmm.
common element perhaps is the community sense, the community space holding. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't know how much, in other words, the specific ceremony, may be less important as being able to hold whatever ceremony you're holding
Yeah.
in a very respectful and powerful way, but having it be a real connection of community and of
It
space.
makes me think that like their community was the container for the ceremony,
Yes.
like they continue. I mean, the community continues. She was a student and I think partner of Kalindi E. And there's so many women that still work in that way, even though Kalindi has died. Omlewa, Jennifer Thedford, Acacia, Kaylin Lewis, some sort of adjacent practitioners like Soma Phoenix. And it's they experience I don't know if all the people I mentioned have experienced it, but some have told me they have experienced a link up where everyone is seeing the same thing at the same time, and seeing people on the other side in the land of the dead having a completely like linked up world occurring where they return to that world too. How cool is that?
That's so fascinating. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so sci-fi.
Yeah, and I guess I wonder if there are more communities like that out there that we just don't know about. The kind
That
of
was my
special.
curiosity. Yeah, like have I have an imaginary group of like cowboys in like Wisconsin, because I heard that there was a group of people growing mushrooms in these fields somewhere up there. And I'm like, well, maybe those guys in Wisconsin have the same thing going on. It's like, you never know. It made me wonder, because the Mazatec and Maria Sabina are one of the only written, legacies of a working mushroom tradition that goes on for many hundreds of years. But does a documented tradition necessarily show that like an undocumented tradition didn't exist? Like maybe you just didn't write them down. Maybe there was taboos to writing things down. And maybe there's reasons why they did write it down that had to do with the synchronistic relationship between Catholicism and the Mazatec way. I don't know, but I think that there have been cultures going on a long time. It's just maybe the mushrooms were like, oh yeah, you don't need to make a whole religion out of it. It was maybe just integrated into life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, makes a lot of sense. Even in our Western traditions, people are starting to say, well, maybe there was psychedelics in the wine of the ancient Greeks and the
There's
Epicureans.
a new book, a guy named Brian something, name begins with an M. He was on Andrew Sullivan's podcast. He has a new book on ancient Christian and Greek roots of entheogens. It blew my mind because they have found, it's only been in the last 5 years, they've been able to pharmacologically deal with artifacts and see the chemicals from plants in them. So all that dreaming that everybody did with the whole Santa Claus thing and the mushrooms and the cross was all just hypothesis. But now they're actually finding it was true, that Christianity was deeply affected by the ancient Greeks who totally tripped.
Right, that's awesome.
Yeah.
We have it in our history, and as it wasn't written down clearly as well, making that same.
Yeah. And I think with the movement moving forward, there's negotiations to be had with indigenous communities, and the fact that the whole psychedelic movement in the United States and eventually the world began with Gordon Wasson's, meeting with Maria Sabina, taking her picture without permission, blah, blah, blah. Like a really just blatant act of colonization that led to actual trouble. Like her house was burned down twice. She was arrested. It was like a problem that needs to be dealt with through a reciprocity over the course of our psychedelic culture. But that doesn't mean that we don't know how as Westerners to do these things, that we don't have a tradition like either that we find out psychedelically or we continue to work with anthropologists. But, I think there's a place for the hunches and the downloads that lead us to that understanding, me at least, that we have been, all of us, been doing these things.
Yeah, bringing that into focus and reconnecting essentially is what we really need to do, it seems, as a people, for the whole sanctity of our planet.
Totally. But yeah, with the stuff, respecting peyote ways and things like that are very much that those are human political concerns that I think are really important. There's the reality of like, we're all one, but there's also negotiations. One time I was on a mushroom trip and I saw how political the scene is. Like people like ayahuasqueros all over the world, they're like kind of competing for various basically cosmological truths that their lineage is carrying through, and it's like a political fight. They're bringing forth the lineage of their people's spirits forward, so that they may live and continue on, and that's political as hell.
Yeah, that brings me back to what you were saying earlier about the laughter and the practicality. It's like bringing it. There is it's like you can't get the humans out of humans. Humanity, that that piece, the competition and everything else, it can be so challenging. So having that lighter attitude, the practical, bringing it, with humor.
Yeah. It's the only way you can see around a situation, right? Like you gotta get above it a little in
Yeah.
order to not be triggered or feel like you have to approach it with your identity. And like also if you lose your identity, like I did when I did my high dose trip, I was just like, oh, I'm not me. Like I
Yeah.
skipped the ego death. I just went straight to being dead.
Okay.
And like all you can do is laugh. It's just like, people think I'm Bett Williams. That's hilarious.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when you say high dose, what's the actual, what are the doses people are doing for high doses?
Anywhere between like I guess 20 and 40 in the Cleveland Detroit thing.
Quite a,
I didn't have a scale, so I definitely, it seemed like 30, but at the very least it was 25 with Syrian rue. So that's
oh,
a lot.
that,
Yeah,
that
Syrian rue
doubles it.
potentiates it. It's just a different ceremony though. I mean, definitely a bad idea to do alone. But I didn't have any, I was able to move around and I just kind of walked around. I danced in full view of my neighbors, like saying prayers over the land and telling them they were great. And like I was sort of mumbling. I don't think they heard me. I was just like, yeah, you know, and my book's coming out, and thank goodness for Michael Pollan and everyone, because you won't need to call the cops on me or anything, because it's just now part of the zeitgeist, and you want to be included in that stuff, and you want to like me.
Right. Yeah. People might wonder if you're just lying there babbling off, or if you can
Oh,
actually,
totally. They know about me. I mean, it's like everyone thinks that, somebody old who lives next door doesn't have the internet, but they know all about me, I'm sure. And then, yes, that day I was dancing like a maniac up on the hill. I'm sure it was really entertaining.
on 25 grams.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like you say, a different ceremony. I like how you point that out. It's like there's high dose, there's Western sort of style, our own little ceremonies, there's the indigenous ceremonies. And
There's more. There's creative ceremonies with friends where
right.
you might be developing your sense of identity as a group. And like, what is this group going to do? Are you guys going to have like a festival, or are you going to make a play, or going to help each other with your art projects? Like that is a definite ceremony that has its own energy that I've done many times. And then there's the ceremony of physical healing, which is just very solitary, which is different from the high ceremony. It's more like, oh gosh, I have to fix this thing. And then there's taking mushrooms because they just make you feel better if you have to go out, especially like if you don't drink. I know a bartender who does mushrooms at work the whole time because doesn't drink, and it's how she gets through her night at the strip club. So
Right. Yeah. There's so many potential and valuable uses, which is great.
And Maria Sabina herself was like, I started out taking them because I was hungry.
Right.
You would think she, being Catholic, would have all these taboos, but I don't know. Like she always said, do them at night and do them in pairs. She also really liked beer and cigars. So I personally have not had a struggle with using them in extremely secular ways and then setting an intention for high sacrament ceremony.
Same time, or for a different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
it remains to be seen. It's got a lifetime of figuring this out, I hope.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a great attitude to have, to keep that open, and also having, allowing for the space for different ways of working with mushrooms that can be all valid in their own ways.
Yeah. And for some reason I think because it was Veterans Day yesterday, I'm thinking about the scene at the end of the book. Like I go to Horizons and I talk, and then my plane flight gets messed up and I end up in Lubbock where my grandmother grew up, and I go into a barbershop where all these veterans and like dudes are hanging out and start talking about mushrooms just because I didn't want to. Turns out the veteran guy was really interested in growing them because he had PTSD. And so we got in this conversation around like the MDMA for veterans, and he had heard all about it. He was kind of sick of being used as a veteran. He's just like, I know what to do. I just need these substances. And it brought up something I see in the movement, which is this kind of, it's a pretty much a left-wing, college-educated elite scene that you're seeing on a conference circuit. And what is not acknowledged is that working class people very often, probably more often than not, have a connection to drug culture in a way that that particular demographic doesn't. Partly because of the military is very much a drug culture, and also because of drug dealing in poor communities. So like the town that I live close to, there's just so much people with stories of like growing up in like small towns in Texas doing mushrooms and hanging out with veterans, and this whole culture that you don't see like on the psychedelic scene, because when it comes to like the way we present ourselves, we're still cleaning up. Still gotta talk to the squares.
Yeah, that's
And I am a college educated, elite class person, but just saying.
Yeah, no, I hear you totally. And this is the grounding. This is a kind of a grounding element that I think important.
And it's like the movement doesn't really belong to us.
Right.
I mean, not to speak for you, it doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to the liberal elite class. It belongs to like the people who've been dealing in this stuff and trading in this stuff and living the life. It's like they have a whole thing going on that doesn't like necessarily reach our Instagram feeds.
Right, exactly. Speaking of some of the bigger picture, the buffalo problem was so interesting. And it reminded me of the Tao Te Ching, which, if you want to maybe say a little bit more about the buffalo problem.
Yeah, the buffalo problem was my psychedelic crisis. And I think in a lifetime, everyone should have a philosophical, an epistemological breakdown. I call it the buffalo problem because buffalo kept showing up in my trips, and I would observe and I'd go like, I'd make up all these stories about buffaloes, or I'd enter into a big rigmarole that I knew I was making happen. And I thought like, am I just killing the buffalo by naming it and putting my own trip on it? And therefore just my need to like make meaning out of everything is just killing everything around me, because all it is coming out of my ego upon the texture of reality itself. I need to shut up and leave the buffalo alone. What do I do? But I can't. So I entered into like a 6-month freak out, basically. That ended up being solved through, I don't even know how to explain it, other than I had a philosophical inquiry and realized like the stuff I thought at 21, I had never actually examined in a really pragmatic way. Like, what do I think reality is? What is this? Like, we don't talk about reality in the town square like we used to as ancient people. Instead, we now have these like fragmented flat earth things where we're trying to touch upon the topic that reality is and what we see, but we're so out of practice, we come up with the dumbest stuff, like, it's real. Like, what is reality a thing is a real conversation. And I had to face it. I had to look at it head on and get comfortable with consciousness. And I read all the studies on, quantum theory and things like that. And it's important, if only to realize that you carry with you beliefs that you probably weren't yours. Because if you're 21, how is that yours? So that kind of interrogation, I think, is very essential just to being human. And in the psychedelic experience, I think you will stop all these people that are like, oh, I just stopped doing psychedelics, and you don't know why. I think it's because that epistemological breakdown was on the horizon, and it may have just been too labor intensive for them at the time, or scary or something.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a challenging position to be in, and the thing it reminded me of a little bit was the Tao Te Ching, which the very first couple lines of the first verse the first chapter, which is the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Naming is the beginning of the 10,000 things.
Yeah.
So right there, as soon as you start applying meaning to things,
Yeah.
this is where the trouble kind of begins.
And
But
language, like the idea that the word is the first separation, goes back to old pre-Socratic myths. And also Terence McKenna talks about how the first creation of language was some guy telling some lady to go get him a glass of water. And finally he just had to say it, and it's like becomes a kind of split, like when he also says like the world is made of language, which makes it even more nightmarish, because if it's made of language, then what are you doing being such a basic bitch with your words? Like that's a lot of responsibility.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, how we define things is limited by our language in many ways
Yeah.
because of that same exact thing. And the mushrooms cut through all this, in ways as we don't have words for things. So,
yeah, and I think they work with language. I mean, that's the Mazatec way of Maria coming up with like the veladas, which it wasn't like an Icaro, which is much more like harmonics based and medicine based. These were like words, I am woman of dew, I am clock woman, I am woman of and you would say a prayer where you would take money from the bank and give it to your family, or you're using language to rearrange things in spirit world so that they affect you in this world.
so interesting. Yeah, a much more practical application, clearly, right? It's almost like
Yeah.
like an incantation or an intention.
Yeah, and you're with all that beautiful copal smoke, and
Hmm.
that's something about the ceremony is the world is reduced. You're in a closed up room, things are shut off, so you're literally in another world. And if all you have are those words and the medicines that are burning and the energy of a cuandera who knows what they're doing, you're completely in a realm where you can become something else. Like I believe you can heal like physical illness and your psyche and all of it.
It's wonderful. And you were the one that turned me on to Copal, so and I love it. It's a really beautiful
Yeah.
scent.
What is interesting is the way archetypes tend to come in that are very common. Like Daniel Pinchbeck had his whole Quetzalcoatl thing where he thought he was Quetzalcoatl, and it was like, but like Tom Lane also works with Quetzalcoatl. And in my book, I have a snake feather thing. I don't really go into the fact that I was aware that was Quetzalcoatl because I didn't want to be like, I saw Quetzalcoatl, but similar imagery can come through medicines. And we are, I live directly north of Huautla de Jimenez, almost directly. So this is a very, Guadalupe, mother of the American land, mother of the Americas landscape. And the spirits live here basically. So it's hard to say what's collective unconsciousness, what unconscious, what comes from the land itself, what comes from the mushrooms.
Do you want to touch on integration at all, or?
Oh, my bratty concepts about integration.
I thought were great, and
Yeah, well, it's like mostly like you can't do these things alone. Like you do it more than a few times alone and you have nobody to talk to. I think that's the biggest danger of these things. But what I do think could be a danger with the idea of how we're doing integration is that it comes back to the idea that the mushrooms have their own plan when you're in a trip, and to the next day approach what you saw from like a Western psychological model might be a way of colonizing your own trip and making a meaning out of it that is a colonized meaning. And yes, you want to glean the medicine of your trip. But be careful not to put it in a box, and be careful not to close the questions that were brought up or to make up answers to things that need to be open-ended.
yeah, this speaks.
Yeah.
I think, a bit to our difficulty with just sitting with uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we were trying to categorize everything and leaving it open, like you're saying, it's a much more open way to allow what was presented
Yeah.
to sink in, you know,
Like we're all acting like lesbians. It's like we need to process and we need closure.
right. Yeah. Well, that processing could mean holding on to stuff.
Yeah, it could mean
Defining.
crystallizing something you got rid of. I mean, it's something in the sweat lodge ways. Like you don't you leave it behind. You don't talk about it right afterwards. You try not to reconjure it outside. Once you've gotten out and you've left it behind, you want to not call it back in.
Right. You sit with it for a while at least, right?
Mhm.
And it's like
Yeah.
you say this in the book a number of times, hold on loosely, child, hold on loosely.
Mhm.
And I just love that reminder throughout, because it really, you know, it's a whole way of approaching life, mushrooms, and
Yeah.
that's very valuable. That
I'm
we
glad you like that line. It's very deep line for me. Again, you have something that sounds like some sort of sock puppet T-shirt logo, but that's psychedelic culture for you.
right, right. Yeah, but in the context, it's just perfect.
Hmm.
You know, it really,
Yeah.
you know, it fits so well.
Well, there's such big ideas, and yeah, like that was my biggest fear was having a download that I'd have to think about for like years and years, and I realized, yeah, you don't want that. Like you want to be able to get along with your life as you want to get along with it.
Right. And
Yeah.
so this is another little piece here where you note there's a line that I just love also. The fact that things are not what they seem is a fucking disaster.
Mhm.
And, you know, just bringing up that whole, you know, trying to figure things out and
Yeah.
where are we and, you know, what should they be? What shouldn't they be?
Yeah, Maria Sabina always said the Westerners came in search of God and we do them for healing. And the Westerners would always go crazy because here they come like with their, you know, existential philosophy stuff. You know, what is the meaning of life? And like you come fully with that. That's even if you do that in a room by yourself without any mushrooms, that presents some dangers.
Yes. Yeah. Right. You can spin out
Mhm.
that one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, not that I don't try to go there as much as I can, because those are the big questions.
Right. And I know there's so many little tasty tidbits in here. I mean, just you know, just some of the writing style is wonderful. You know, there's a particular line. Um, well, I'll read the paragraph.
Mhm.
It's the beginning of chapter 30. Sometimes the person you could have been, who other people see you as or wish you were, shows up in your life as a fragment within another person. Rose had long blonde, unconfused hair and wore pale jeans and thrift store t-shirts. Her femininity was condensed and alpha. The force field of it dissolved my masculinity, and I let my hair down and found myself wearing cutoff shorts and a t-shirt decorated with 3 cartoon kittens. I love that so much because it really it paints the picture so well.
I
And
say
it's
that we were Romy and Michelle about to get really fucking high,
yeah,
like the Romy and Michelle high school reunion. May I read a paragraph from that chapter?
yes, that would be great.
Because it's kind of it's the ceremony that allowed me to realize that I'd known what I was doing all along and that,
Right.
you know, I can return now that I have some skills. So I do the ceremony with Rose and it's epic as hell. And then I'm faced with the fact that the Guadalupe on the altar is just shining this love out at me and I don't know how to deal. So I said, I allowed it to happen. I received the gigantic love. The river of it drank through me. dissolving every defense I'd ever had against this love that had always been there waiting. It said I was clean, even though I wasn't, and didn't need to be in the face of this love. Human as low-hanging fruit on the vine in a garden universe. This bleeding heart show was over now. It never was. Humility and gratitude served as my king and queen, and even that she took from me, saying, only love, girl, try it. Be that child peach.
Yes.
It's hard writing about what love actually feels like.
Yeah, that's what you do a great job.
Right. Yeah. No, that was astounding ceremony. Like just to have done mushrooms for 8 years and to never have actually experienced like a energy coming from an object that was like flooring me with like what a kind of love that I had no idea existed.
That's a beautiful statement, really, because sometimes we don't know what that feels like, especially if we've never felt it anywhere else in our lives.
Right.
Anyway. So it's like, wow,
Isn't that it? It all comes down to that moment when you're with the psychedelic and you go, wow, like it's something else altogether different.
Right.
And that incomprehensible wow, it's like when I think of the corporate things and this and that, I try to remember like we've experienced that. And when I felt that, it shocked me to my core. And yet it was so big that I had to forget about it the next day because I couldn't even make sense of it in regular life. I would say like, oh, I have to do this more often, but you don't, right? Until you do and you commit.
I hear you on that.
Yeah. So it's extraordinary. And the fact that like, we talk about these things in conferences and we do decrim and all this. And it's just like the people who have entered in we're so blessed. It's really something. And also, and it makes you wish your mom and your dad and your neighbors, you want people to experience that because it's so extraordinary.
Yeah. It's deeply moving.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any words.
Yeah, under the guise we're like, oh, we want to help them, or we want to fix their PTSD or this and that. It's like, no, guess what? Like our hearts just want. It's too sad to be it's lonely to not have everyone do it,
right.
Or at least the people close to you. It's definitely not for everyone, but yeah.
Well, also, I mean, you do an excellent job, which I was marveling at. Particularly, I think it's in this chapter of how you describe your psilocybin journey. And, quite often, I don't think I would be able to remember all of that and particularly write it as, so clearly and lucidly.
So, I remember mushroom trips better than I do regular life. And I think for artists, there's a lot of mushroom art out there and LSD art. And I think there's like a ability in the trip for the artist to take a photograph of a moment and say like, remember this.
Right. Yeah. Well, you do a good job of that. Sometimes people will say that, or they can lose themselves in the whole journey going, I have to remember this. And then they forget it anyway. Well, I'm going to read another little paragraph here, which is really very apropos considering our whole discussion. Your book is a signpost, the mushroom said. You need to finish it already, dude. I know you care about quality writing and stuff, but the thing is, I hate to break it to you, most people aren't even going to read it. Its function as a signpost exists outside of whether people read your book or not, and the mushrooms want their goddamn signpost.
Yeah. Well, there was like a feeling of like they pick me and I got to write a book and they need me to do it. And I think that's true. Like the mushrooms want to go to the farthest yonder. Michelle Janikian, I think, such a wonderful carrier of the mushroom spores out into the world. And so there was that sense that they just want a place to be mycelial for us to find each other. like the way this book is a signpost is like how we found each other. And like, this is Mike Perry's art. He did the cartoons for Broad City, which is very psychedelic. They had a whole episode on mushrooms. And so the book itself is definitely such a object. But we all are signposts when we come out as psychedelic people. And the mushrooms really like that because, as I say in the book, they could travel from Mexico on our shirt and maybe get in our garden, which is how they travel on birds and animals to go where they go, or they could travel in our heads, in our minds, and in our language.
Right.
So we're all signposts. Yeah.
Yeah, and it speaks to what you were saying earlier about the mushrooms agenda. Mm-hmm. Bigger than our own journeys.
Yeah.
So it's all,
and I try to keep it simple rather than thinking they're evil gray aliens coming from outer space. They really are just trying to get us off the planet so they can redo it. I just try to I think of mushrooms in general, that for the most part, they bring ecosystems into balance, and that's their job.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And so, because they can, as you said earlier, you know, they can be a little bit of tricksters in a sense, you know, have to filter, you know, it is a collaboration somewhat. So we have our piece, but you bring quite a practicality, a sensibility, you know, that's not overblown into, you know, the God realm of psychedelics are holier and they can do no wrong. And there's, you know, that whole end of it. And I really appreciate that part of your whole book and the approach.
I'm a spiritual underachiever. I don't like to read things that make me feel that I'm not okay as I am. Yeah. But hard enough time as it is.
That's a great way to put it. Spiritual underachiever. Yes. Toward the end of the book on page 309, starting out with our conversation, counter the message I hear all the time within the movement that psychedelics must be designated in the minds of, destigmatized in the minds of mainstream Americans, that we should take out the association with the counterculture and educate them that mushroom can be, if used in a clinical setting with a trained professional, a miracle medicine for our epidemic level ills. You know, our whole conversation has been about this in your book as well, you know, bringing that poetic element in, the sense of ceremony, the sense of respect, holding on loosely. We're collaborating with, you know, the mushrooms in many of our journeys. The mushrooms have their own agenda. I mean, all these
things. Stealing power too. Like Timothy Leary called it stealing fire. And in the book, I say stealing power. Like, it's powerful to do psychedelics in your own circles. It helps your sense of identity and who you are, and what your personal life purpose is coming forward. So when we intersect with like the more elite circles that claim gatekeeper, you know, authority over these things, we're entering into a realm it's not my world, that's for sure. So to do them completely in my world without any commerce involved, it's very empowering.
Right. That sounds great. Well, maybe on that note,
forward to coming and hanging with Psychedelia Integration in LA when COVID chills out, and do something fun. I want this culture to, I mean, we're going to cop back on the culture, and it's going to look so different from what like the people think who've been in control of the situation think it's going to be. There's been so much reorganizing and scheming and ideas for having a lot of fun going around. So I'm excited about it feels like the movement will just be starting when the COVID chills, hopefully, if it does.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful about that myself. So
it will.
All right. So I guess thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, have a good one.
And
always good to see you and talk to you.
And you too, Bett. Always a pleasure.